Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in 1 minute. Hello, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to our webinar today, where we'll be taking a look at the 2019 Safe Routes to School Program Census. My name is Michelle Lieberman. I'm the Senior Technical Assistance Manager at the Safe Routes Partnership, and I will be your webinar facilitator today. So today you'll be hearing about the Safe Routes to School Program Census that we conducted earlier this year and the findings from the census at the national level. We're also going to hear from our friends in Michigan at the Michigan State Safe Routes to School program. Michigan is one of 4 states that we were able to do a deeper dive into the program census. So they're going to tell you about their state program as well as some of the programs being run in cities and at schools in Michigan. A little bit about us. If you're not familiar with the Safe Routes Partnership, we're a national nonprofit organization working to advance safe walking and biking to and from schools. We're working to improve the health and well-being of kids of all races, income levels, and abilities, and fostering the creation of healthy communities for everyone. A little bit about what we do. We're working to improve the quality of life for kids, families, and communities. We advance policy change at the federal, state, regional, and local levels. We catalyze support for safe, healthy, active communities, and we share our deep expertise through things such as these webinars. Before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of webinar housekeeping. On the left, you'll see the GoToWebinar viewer, and you'll see the presentation through this viewer. On the right is the GoToWebinar control panel. Here you can raise your hand, ask questions, and select the audio mode you'll use. Please note that your control panel will collapse automatically when it's not in use. To keep it open, you can click View and then uncheck Auto Hide Control Panel. We have 2 options for listening to us today, telephone and mic and speakers. If you're having sound problems with one selection, try the other option, and we're going to do our best to try to field any issues if you send us a chat message. Even though you're muted today, we really want to hear your questions. Use the question box to ask speakers questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar, which will take place after all of the speakers have presented, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible in the time at the end. After you view today's presentation, and if you want to view it again or send the link to a colleague or friends, you can do this by going to our website, saferoutespartnership.org. If you click on the resource tab heading and click on webinars in the list on the left side of the page, all of our past webinars are stored here, and our webinar recording will be up in the next day or so. So I'd really urge you to take a look at this page and share that recording. Want to also let you know that there's another day left in our Safe Routes to School National Conference flash sale. You can register at the early bird rate until tomorrow night at midnight, and you can go to Safe Routes Conference or saferoutesconference.org in order to register. So now for our speakers, I'll share each of the bios before their presentation. We're going to first hear from Sarah Zimmerman and myself. Sarah is the Program and Policy Director for the Safe Routes Partnership. In this role, she works to support communities by obtaining resources and advice they need to increase physical activity and safe walking and bicycling for children and adults. She oversees the work of the policy and program team and providing high-quality assistance and advice to low-income communities and other communities of different sizes and in different regions around the country. And then I'm Michelle Lieberman. Again, I'm the Senior Technical Assistance Manager of Safe Routes Partnership. I will not read my own bio, but we'll go ahead and pass it off to Sarah to start.
Hello, everybody. Give me a second as I get things started here. All right. I am Sarah. I won't read you Michelle's bio either, but it's a shame because she has a great bio. I am really delighted to be able to share this overview of our National Safe Routes to School Program Census project. This is a project that has generated incredible amounts of really useful and interesting data for us, and we just couldn't be happier to be sharing some of it with you. So I want to tell you our agenda for this part of today's webinar. I'm going to provide a quick overview of what the census was, why we conducted it. Then I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to give us a reminder about why Safe Routes to School programs matter so much. And she's also going to provide some of the background details on how we conducted the census. Then she's going to hand it back to me to discuss our results and sum up some of our conclusions and recommendations. So I'm just going to start by giving you a quick overview of what this project was all about. So this project was funded by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and we worked closely with YUSA on the project as well. They're really both great thought partners and helped us come up with a great project, and we appreciate their assistance and collaboration on it. So in a nutshell, the aim of this project was to inventory and gather information on local Safe Routes to School programs across the country using an online survey. And the goal of this was to help us develop a better understanding of what's really happening on the ground with Safe Routes to School programs. So we wanted to understand the scope, the nature, the structure, what kind of work they were doing, what kind of effects they were having. And our focus here was on Safe Routes to School programs themselves, rather than some of the efforts that are also Safe Routes to School efforts happening around the country that may be focused on a particular street improvement near a school, so particular infrastructure improvements. We were really focusing on the program side of things. Another goal of this project was to help us identify needs from the field, identify research gaps that exist, and a variety of additional things like that. So the results were, we received hundreds of surveys from 44 different states plus DC that provided us with tremendous amounts of new learnings and insights. So really valuable. Here's a snapshot of the programs that submitted valid surveys to us. We received 511 total surveys. 427 of those met our criteria for final inclusion. We're going to dig into those results shortly, but first I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to remind us why we're so interested in learning about what's happening on the ground with Safe Routes to School programs.
Thanks, Sarah. So why are we so interested in Safe Routes to School? Why do Safe Routes to School programs matter? I know a lot of you are really familiar with this. In the U.S., we continue to have a lot of concerns and challenges, either directly or indirectly related to the trip to school. About a third of our children are overweight or obese, triple the rate of a generation ago. Family car trips to school make up about 10 to 14% of morning congestion. Motor vehicle injuries are one of the leading causes of death for children, whether they be walking or biking or in the car as passengers. And injuries and fatalities are especially high in low-income neighborhoods. So Safe Routes to School is addressing these challenges and providing a number of benefits that are shown here on the screen, including improving traffic safety through street improvements near schools, reducing congestion around schools and improving air quality, providing those opportunities for regular physical activity for students, improving their health and bettering their academic performance, increasing safety from crime, creating more community connectedness, reducing household transportation costs and school busing costs. The list kind of goes on and on. And we know that Safe Routes to School is working. We have studies that show this. And Safe Routes to School increases the number of kids getting healthy exercise on the way to school. For example, one study looked at schools with and without Safe Routes to School programs and saw that about 32% of the kids walking, or kids at schools with Safe Routes to School programs were walking and biking, while schools without Safe Routes to School programs only had about 20% of kids walking and biking. And to date, more than 17,000 schools and 6.8 million students nationally have benefited from Safe Routes to School projects and programs. So for our Safe Routes to School program census, we were really focused on programs, not just engineering improvements. We were really looking to address challenges and strategies and actions that are encompassing the 6 E's. So besides engineering, we have education, evaluation, encouragement, enforcement, equity. And I think everybody on this webinar is probably pretty familiar with those. But why are we really interested in the 6 E's? Part of it is that comprehensive approaches, those that tackle multiple aspects of our issues, are really effective. So for much of the US, we've created a culture where the default is to kind of get into the car and drive. So we know we can't just put down new crosswalks or bike lanes and expect kids to use them, or for their families to feel safe letting them walk or bike. And encouragement and education activities can help change this. We also can't expect kids to be able to walk or bike if we don't give them the engineering changes to our streets and neighborhoods to give them safe places to do so. So one example of how this plays out comes from a study of more than 800 schools in 4 states that found that safe routes to school interventions resulted in an 18% increase in walking and biking when there was an engineering improvement, like a new crosswalk or bike lane, and a 31% increase over 5 years of education and encouragement program. So together, we can really see that combined efforts can really increase walking and biking to school together. So a little bit about how we conducted the census. As Sarah mentioned, we used an online survey, and we inventoried and gathered information from local programs across the country through this survey. We collected survey on information on a national basis and also had the opportunity to dig in deep into 4 states, New York, Nevada, Illinois, and Michigan. Michigan you'll hear today. And we're developing reports and have developed reports at the national level and also for the 4 focus states that really look at the safe routes to school policy environment, provide a snapshot of local programming based on that survey information, and observations and recommendations. So here's a quick view of the survey. We piloted this survey in 2018 and then refined it and then put it back out again in early 2019. The survey has 30 questions and took about 15 minutes for each response to fill out. It includes information on the number of schools and students served, the structure, staffing, and funding of the program, the kinds of activities the program undertakes, and some open-ended responses for information on success stories, challenges, and so on. We did quite a few rounds of outreach to make sure that the survey got into the hands of as many programs as possible. We first started with a direct email to contacts in our national database, so likely those of you on this webinar probably got an email directly from us. We also asked our national partners and state partners, folks like the WISE, other nonprofits and associations, the state departments of transportation and state health departments to help get the word out by disseminating the link to the survey. We also used our website, social media, e-newsletters, and posts on various listservs. We did another round of direct emails and calls to programs that we knew were out there but hadn't filled out our survey yet. And then finally, over the summer, we did additional broad outreach once we had seen where the responses had come in and were able to use that map that Sarah showed to prod and nudge people to fill out the survey once again. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to talk about the results of the survey.
All right. So we're going to jump into the results of the survey in some detail here. So I shared this image above. This is a Google map, and you can look at it on our website. You can hover over the little blue dots, and it'll provide more detail about each program. So that's an opportunity for you to get to explore these results a little bit more and learn more about each program. But as you can see here, there are areas on the map that show a greater density of safe routes to school programs. I wanted to start by pointing out that in reality, at this scale, that's not actually particularly revealing. What we're really seeing from the distribution here is where people live in the United States. And we can tell that when we compare it with a population density map, both for the density map and for our map, we see more going on the West Coast and the East Coast near the Great Lakes in the Florida area. And we see scattered population centers in the rest of the country, where we also see both populations and safe routes to school programs cropping up. So what results can we take away from this? So as I mentioned before, there were 427 submissions that met our criteria for final inclusion. 15 of those were from statewide programs. So for most of the results that I'm going to go through that follow, we didn't include those in the analysis. They were just a little bit different kind of program. Our final results included DC and 44 states. So that was every state except for the 6 listed here. We followed up, as Michelle mentioned, in a variety of ways, but also specifically in these states, we contacted different stakeholders and really tried to find whether there were programs in those states. And we came up fairly dry. So there may well be some programs in these states, and I hope there are, but this is actually an accurate reflection of fairly low levels of engagement with safe routes to school programming in those states. The states with the most respondents included California, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, Oregon, and Virginia. These results were also actually not a surprise, given our understanding of the fairly strong safe routes to school programming in those states. Now, before I go into the rest of the data, I want to just highlight a limitation of the work that we were able to do here. Because the universe of safe routes to school programs is not known, there's no comprehensive list of all the programs out there. We were unable to sample that population in a way that would create a representative sample. So our data here really help us understand the population of safe routes to school programs much better. They give us lots of insights into all kinds of aspects of safe routes to school programs. But our quantitative results may or may not be accurate for the overall population of safe routes to school programs. So that is just something to kind of bear in mind as I go through these other results. So one of the complexities of working with safe routes to school programs is that there is really enormous variation in how programs are structured and organized. And some of that variation just reflects what works locally, but sometimes it also really has ramifications for how programs actually work. So a big goal of this census for us was to get a better sense of how different programs look on the ground. So let's talk through a little bit of that. So one of the first questions that we were curious about is we knew that some programs cover a single city. Some programs work within a single school district, and other programs are structured different ways. So we wanted to understand a little bit about what percentage of programs, how that kind of varied around the country. And what we found was that 29% of the local respondents told us that their programs served a city or a town. So they served the whole city or town. 26% served a whole school district. 13% served a whole county. Another 13% were just at a single school, and another 20% had service areas that were either larger or smaller, so they didn't fit neatly into either of those categories. Another really important factor in the emphasis and goals of safe routes to school programs ends up being determined by the nature. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just noticing that we're missing our heading on this slide. Something got cut off here. But it's determined by the nature of the agency or organization that hosts the program, which is what it should say up there. So what that means is that programs at schools often have more focus on education and kind of programmatic matters. Programs that are hosted by planning departments may have a stronger emphasis on infrastructure improvements. Both important, just different ways of doing things, and we wanted to know more about what the universe looked like out there. So because programs that only serve a single school are really overwhelmingly hosted by schools and school districts, we looked at sponsoring agencies for our sample as a whole, and then we also looked at them after removing those one school programs. And what we found was that even after removing those programs, school districts were the most common host of a program. So 26% of programs hosted by school districts. Nonprofits were the next most common sponsors at 19%. Transportation and public works departments were the next most common at 16%. Then health departments at 12%, planning departments, and a number of other kinds of entities were occasional hosts of programs, but much less frequently. Oh, good, our titles are back now. Then we also wanted to understand a little bit more about the student demographics, the demographics of students who are served. So we asked our respondents to tell us roughly what percentage of the schools they served were Title I schools. So schools where more than 40% of students were low income. And of our survey respondents, about 40% worked with schools that were mostly or were all Title I schools. 20% worked with some Title I schools, 20% worked with either few or none, and an additional 20% just weren't really sure. We also wanted to get a sense of which student racial groups were being served by safe routes to school programs. Now, few programs really have any exact data on this, so we asked respondents to kind of give us a estimate to tell us what percentage which racial groups made up 30% or more of the students that they were served. So that means that, for example, if a program served a student population that was half white and half Latinx, they would mark both of those groups. So what that means is that, of course, these numbers don't add up to 100% since programs were serving multiple racial groups in significant proportions. So according to the local program respondents, 60% of programs served a significant percentage of white students, 40% served a significant percentage of Latinx students, 26% a significant percentage of Black students, 12% served a significant percentage of Asian American, Pacific Islander, or Hawaiian students, and 4% were serving a significant percentage of Native students. Now, the method that we used to sample here made it difficult to compare these numbers to population numbers as a whole, but when we looked at those numbers in proportion to each other, we saw that, in fact, they are roughly proportional to the overall racial breakdown of American students. So while, we don't have a great deal of clarity here, I think what we can take away is that no particular racial group is being really sort of significantly underserved by safe routes to school programs, which is good news. We also looked at where programs were located, and we found that about 21% of safe routes to school programs were in rural areas. Interestingly, that's about proportional to U.S. population rates. Just under 20% of Americans live in rural areas. So that is good to know that those areas are being properly served. 39% of programs were in urban areas and 37% were in suburban areas. We also looked at, we lost our title here. The title of this one should be Age of Program. We also asked survey respondents when their program started, and about half of programs were 5 years or younger. So they were started within the last 5 years. 30% of programs were in the 6 to 10 year range. Almost 20% were 11 to 15 years, and there were 4 programs that were older than 15 years. So this was actually surprising to us that so many of these programs were more than 5 years old, that more than half of them were. And I think it's really good news for the health of safe routes to school programming in the United States overall. So the next category of things that we looked at were characteristics of programs that our experience has shown us are really important to the strength, the effectiveness, the comprehensiveness, and the sustainability of safe routes to school programs. These are things that we commonly call the building blocks of safe routes to school programs. And those are staff, task forces, funding, and supportive policies. So let us look at each of these in turn. A really key element of the success of a safe routes to school program is staffing. There are lots and lots of really amazing programs around the country that are run by volunteers. But what we have seen is that for a program to really be sustainable in the long term and really comprehensively reach kids in the community, they need paid staff. And so what we saw here is that our respondents indicated that about a third of their programs had a full-time coordinator, full-time paid coordinator. A third had a part-time paid coordinator. Almost 20% had an unpaid coordinator. And then another 20%, around 20%, had no coordinator or staff. So they were happening sort of more in an ad hoc kind of a way. All right. Sorry, this slide got a little messed up. This slide is trying to show us what the results were for our advisory teams and task forces. And what you can't tell, but what it actually shows is that almost 2/3 of local safe routes to school survey respondents have a task force or an advisory team. So that's actually really good news. Those are pretty good numbers overall. And interestingly, we looked at those numbers both for the single school programs and for the multi-school programs and found that they were fairly similar. It was really about 2/3 across the country for both of those. So that's good overall. What we also saw when we drilled down into some states that had strong state support for programming was that those numbers were even higher. So seeing more programs with those task forces would really be positive. So we also asked programs to tell us about the funding for their program. Almost 20% of programs reported that they were unfunded. 45% indicated that they had a state or a federal grant. And we didn't have people differentiate between these because, in point of fact, we found that people get these pretty mixed up and aren't able to accurately report sometimes which their funding actually is, since they both come through the state. But most of those funds are probably federal transportation alternatives program dollars. And so these results really tell us how significant and important that source of funding is to these programs. A quarter of the programs are receiving some kind of local funds, which is very encouraging, since this is a potentially much more stable and long-term source of funding. And then, as you can see, programs are also finding additional funding in a wide variety of different places. And we know that programs are very innovative and entrepreneurial in looking for funding. So we also asked about whether programs were operating in environments that had supportive safe routes to school policy language, so either in their cities or their school districts or the like. And that's important because policy change is just really a key way of making sure that an initiative like Safe Routes to School becomes institutionalized instead of just being kind of a flash in the pan or a fad. And according to our survey respondents, 61% of their programs were in communities that did have some kind of language supporting safe routes to school in some kind of local city or school district policy or plan, whereas 39% said that they did not have any policies supporting safe routes to school, or they weren't sure. And the most common type of place that this language was found was in bicycle and pedestrian plans or other kinds of plans. We explored this a little bit more, and we found that in some of these different policies and plans, the language, some of them actually weren't actually quite officially policies, so that sort of weakens that number a little bit. And then we also found that many of the policies did have a mention of safe routes to school, but it was pretty weak. So this is a good trend, but there's really a lot of work to do here on policy. Now, we also looked at program activities, and we were, of course, really interested to learn more about what kinds of activities Safe Routes to School programs tended to conduct. So with many of these questions, we followed up with more detailed additional questions on top of them, and there's a lot more than we're going to be able to share right at this moment with you to learn here. But as you see, Walk to School Day and Bike to School Day were the most popular activities. And that accords with our experience because we really found that those single day events are kind of low-hanging fruit and one of the easiest things for programs to do and are really common starting places as well. 60% of programs are doing student educational activities, which is great. And then we also found that a smaller but a decent percentage of programs were embracing some of the more difficult but more effective activities. So 37% of programs are conducting walking school buses, 11% conducting bicycle trains, 21% are doing monthly walk to school days, and 20% are doing weekly walk or roll days to school. So those are great and really interesting. We were also interested to understand more about how schools were selected for Safe Routes to School activities and services, because that really has a lot of implications for the equity aspects of a program. And what we saw was that the majority of programs are working with schools that show interest. Of course, that is a good factor, but if that's the only factor, it has the potential to really reward more affluent schools that have more bandwidth to engage with Safe Routes to School and student transportation. So it's good to see that also 25% of schools are looking at economic data and prioritizing based on that. There's some work to do in this arena. We were surprised by how many programs are working on street improvement related issues in addition to education and encouragement programming. So only 20% reported no involvement in this. This is just really great because it's, of course, as Michelle mentioned, essential for both of these arenas to be changing in a community. Now, targeted outreach and programming also helps us understand how comprehensive a Safe Routes to School program is. When programs treat all kids as though they're the same, some groups of kids end up falling through the cracks. So overall, the number of programs conducting targeted outreach and programming were fairly low. 18% are doing outreach with students with disabilities, 15% some sort of outreach or programming with students who are immigrants, and 10% with focus on girls. I think that really shows that there's some great stuff happening at the local level, but also really a lot of room for growth and for assistance in that arena. We also asked programs to tell us what they were planning or wanted to improve in their program, and the highest results were wanting to reach more students and wanting to introduce new program activities. Funding and policy change were also up there and of interest to many schools, and 26% want to be able to do more outreach and reach more specific demographic groups better. So that's promising too. So we also asked a number of open-ended questions, and we got hundreds and hundreds of really interesting and fascinating responses. So I've just given you a little sampling of those here. We asked about successes and learned that there are innovative activities and just really substantial changes in mode share and health benefits that are occurring in states across the country, so really all over the country. We also asked about challenges, and we heard just a lot of different kinds of challenges that programs are facing. Most of them, ones that come as no surprise, but are really, really significant and impede the ability to be as effective as programs would like to. And those are challenges around funding, around just the fact that change takes a long time, finding volunteers, some of the challenges with distance in rural areas, and a variety of additional challenges. So as you can imagine, there's a lot more data and more interesting findings. And when we come out with the national report that Michelle mentioned, we will be able to go into more detail there. But here's just a few final conclusions and recommendations that came out of this work. First of all, there are just hundreds of great programs around the country, and that's something to be excited about and proud about as a movement. There is an uneven geographic spread and really variable strength of safe routes to school programs in different places, which is certainly related to the strength of the state programming in different places and the state programs. There's a solid rural presence of safe routes to school, which is great to see. 51% of programs are more than 5 years old, so there's sort of a decent longevity happening, which is really great. We also see that many programs are without staff or funding and are being run by volunteers. So those efforts are wonderful and amazing, but those people need money and resources in order to really be able to sustain those programs in the long term. And then programs expressed a desire for a wide range of additional resources, so toolkits, assistance engaging with specific additional populations, assistance with mapping, evaluations, volunteers, funding, application assistance. So there's really a lot of different needs that were expressed. And then finally, some states are really doing a great job of using the federal money that they have and bringing different resources together in ways that are making an enormous difference for local programs. And other states really could be doing more and could learn a lot of lessons from some of those strong states. There are also really a lot of lessons to be learned from the great programs on the ground around the country. But overall, we need more funding, more policy support, more technical assistance, and more resources for those local programs to help more of them thrive. So with that, I will turn it back over to Michelle to introduce our friends from Michigan.
Thanks, Sarah. So now we're going to hear from Michigan and our folks at the state program there. We're going to hear from Brian Armstrong. He is the Safe Routes to School Program Manager for the Michigan Department of Transportation. He's been in this role since January 2008. Before that, he joined MDOT in 1999 as the Transportation Enhancement Program Coordinator. Brian received both bachelor's and master's degrees in urban and regional planning from Eastern Michigan University. We're also going to hear from Max Fulkerson with the Michigan Fitness Foundation. Max works with schools and communities in the Southwest, North, and Superior regions of Michigan to help develop and implement safe routes to school programs and manages the non-infrastructure contracts and invoices. Previously, he supported talent and career development as the Director of Career Services at Eaton Regional Education Service Agency. He holds a master's degree in geography from the University of Missouri. I'll pass it off to you, and Max, you might need to switch your display settings.
Thanks, Michelle. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect. All set.
Great. Again, thanks. I'm Max Fulkerson. I'm the Contracts Coordinator for the Safe Routes to School program here at the Michigan Fitness Foundation.
And I'm Brian Armstrong with the Michigan Department of Transportation, where I manage the Safe Routes to School program. We're going to look at the historical context.
Sorry, we got confused. Yeah, So in this presentation, we're going to start with the historical context. We're going to talk a little bit about the state program and how it's organized, talk about some of the challenges that we've experienced through the years trying to implement the program, some of the lessons learned in dealing with those challenges, and finally, we're going to take the opportunity to highlight some of the local programs that we're really proud about.
Historically, we ran a 2-year program with transportation enhancement funding in 2003 and 2004 to develop the Safe Routes to School action planning process that we use here in Michigan. And that ended up being over 900 people and over 25 organizations. Then Congress created the Safe Routes to School program at the federal level, and it was a standalone program for a few years. We used grant coordinators here at the Michigan Fitness Foundation. One of the things that was developed with some of our partners in Southeast Michigan was the Make Tracks curriculum, which was a method for middle school students or older elementary students to actually lead the process and then develop their own action plan and recommendations and then take them to the PTO, school board, city council, et cetera. And we started doing mini grants, which were non-infrastructure only or programming only in 2011. And we've always focused on finding and developing local champions. 2013, Congress collapsed some programs and Safe Routes to School became a category of Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP. We then began having our Safe Routes to School applications still go through the application review committee and technical review process that other TAP applications go through. And we started using their conditional commitment step, which we had not done before with Safe Routes to School, which is instead of a funding award immediately to an application when we decided we want to fund it, it's a commitment that tells the applicant that we will give them those dollars once they get their project designed, all necessary permits acquired, and they have the funding that they have to contribute for construction engineering and any cost overruns. And it's been helpful in getting folks to move faster sometimes after we make our decisions. And then we started the district-wide approach, basically with what we were seeing in our mini grants. 2007, we were fortunate enough to host the first National Safe Routes to School Conference at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, and to receive from the National Partnership the first James L. Oberstar Award that went to MDOT, basically, as I understand it, for our planning process that we developed in our handbook. In 2008, I started with the Safe Routes to School program, and we awarded our first 51 grants, which basically used up the 5 years of funding that Congress had initially given the Safe Routes program. And in 2013, the present, even though Safe Routes is a category of TAP, we continue to run it as if it's its own program so that our non-traditional customers, if you will, typically can simply focus on Safe Routes to School and don't have to learn too much else. In Michigan, Safe Routes to School is funded under the Transportation Alternatives Program. It is a competitive major grant application process which reviews by engineers, historians, other experts here at MDOT and in a couple other agencies. And MDOT has engineers and process folks that once we've committed to a project, they oversee the project design, the bidding and letting and construction of the project, including payments. I'm the state level program coordinator. I still have worked full time even after TAP began. And we've got good collaboration. Our Department of Environmental Quality has a transportation unit. They work with folks if they got to have a wetland permit, for instance. And the State Historic Preservation Office works with us. And we have offices around the state called Transportation Service Centers that we often have those folks participating in the local Safe Routes to School action planning process and occasionally in project implementation.
And when the project or the program was just beginning, MDOT recognized right away that they're experts in roads and bridges and things, but maybe not so much in working with the schools. So they contracted with the Michigan Fitness Foundation, and we're fortunate enough to continue that partnership to provide technical assistance to the schools and the communities during the planning process. We also have a competitive mini grant process for programming only funds for enforcement, education, and encouragement. And we coordinate and administer the non-infrastructure contracts that pay for those programming At the Michigan Fitness Foundation, we have a program director and 3 grant coordinators. And again, we're focused primarily on training and education for the potential grant recipients, schools and communities.
So here's a map of the regions that MDOT uses administratively in Michigan, and this map is showing the 3 Safe Routes to School coordinators and the different regions that they each service. And it's given a contact there of Katie Alexander, our director here at the MFF for the Safe Routes to School program in Michigan. The context of neighborhood scaled, school-focused, active transportation plans that we developed in the planning process is the same context or focus that we use when we give mini grants and other non-infrastructure grants.
So a little bit more about the mini grants. They're a way for communities and schools to build awareness, to identify and develop their local champions, and to basically demonstrate that walking school buses, bike trains, those kinds of Safe Routes to School programs will work and are feasible in their community. It's also an opportunity for districts to tackle this program and get involved all at the same time, and we encourage that whenever possible. When the program first started, we had schools applying one by one, and if you've worked with schools, you know that if something is successful in one, it's not too long before the other ones want to do it. And so we developed a district-wide approach whereby 2 or more schools will plan and apply for programming funding at the same time. And also, if it's a major grant, their projects will be designed, bid, and constructed all as a single project. So the reason that we really like the district-wide approach is because it's a win-win for everybody. It's a chance to benefit. The benefits for the students and the parents and the schools can all come at once. You don't have certain schools sort of standing in line and waiting to come on board while others get the attention. The additional the additional benefits for the local municipality and other experts is there's fewer meetings if they're only going through the project planning cycle once. The project only gets built once, so there's a less impact for the construction season. Additional outcomes can include placemaking, economic development, tourism, and increased spaces and opportunities for active transportation and recreation and exercise for the wider community. Because although these projects are developed and focused on students walking and biking to and from school, once they're built, everybody can enjoy the benefits.
Some of the challenges, and I'm sure most people in this country enjoy these, are aging infrastructure, such as the condition of the sidewalk in the photo here, car-centric transportation and land use patterns, school policies. We've had schools that wouldn't let students or students under a certain age walk and or bike to school. And then actually school attendance patterns here in Michigan have changed since I began. Actually, most schools now have only 3 grades per school. And by the time a team develops, goes through the action planning process, develops a major grant application, and then the project is constructed through the federal process, the same students and parents are no longer at the school that began the process. Cities of Promise refers to the 8 largest communities in Michigan that have primarily underserved community populations, and we started a real focus on those in 2008, and we've had quite a bit of success. And then engineering costs are quite a challenge for folks, because even though we're able to give 100% federal funding for construction and non-infrastructure activities, they still have to pay for design engineering and construction engineering and some administrative costs.
So Michigan has a tremendous amount of diversity, which is both a strength and a challenge. And so local programs are designed to fit that context. Of course, designing with equity at the forefront of the planning process helps to smooth out those differences and reduce barriers to participation. The planning process will draw on the strengths already present in the local community to make the program reflect the character of that community. Some communities use Safe Routes to School program to celebrate what makes that place special. Other communities see Safe Routes to School as part of their plan to transform their community into a walkable place, or one that's more focused on wellness. And we found that successful programs are the ones that are able to incorporate those activities and traditions and events that already make that particular place special and are a part of that community fabric.
This is a schematic showing the process as we really understand it today from our lessons learned working with communities based on our initial planning process and expectations. First, you have to build awareness, and we originally thought that would happen just through participation in International Walk to School Day or National Bike to School Day, but we found out that we really needed a little bit more in a lot of these communities, which is why we implemented the mini grant process to try to develop awareness and desire to participate in the community. So then we go to where we thought we started, which is to develop the action plan using our planning process, and then developing a grant application and getting a grant and implementing it to develop the programs, and then building community support to keep the projects going, keep the programs going. Next.
So the things that we've discovered really help sustain these programs. Number one is partnerships, both in the planning process as well as in the implementation of program, to provide technical expertise, enthusiasm, as well as funding for the kinds of activities that the federal funds cannot be used to support. Michigan currently uses toll credits to put up the match portion that would be required under the TAP program, and so that's really a strong component to the state's success. At the local level, we're seeing more input and involvement of public health officials, community hospitals, those kinds of professionals, and so we're really excited about expanding the comprehensive nature of the team. A fundamental thing right away when we work with our schools and communities is to try and get them to have realistic expectations about the planning process, how long it takes to build the infrastructure improvements, and that's really a key in helping the group kind of maintain its energy and keep pushing through the whole process to the end. And finally, technical assistance is really important. At Michigan Fitness Foundation, we have regional workshops that we put on about 4 times a year. We have training videos on our website, and we also go to the schools and communities to provide one-on-one support during the planning process and also after the award.
Holt, Michigan is a small community near Lansing, which is in mid-Michigan, Lower Peninsula. And we had a principal there that was at an elementary school very focused on physical activity, got involved with Safe Routes to School almost at the beginning of the program. That school has done walking school buses and annual Walk to School Day participation since, at least since 2008 when I started with the program. And that principal led that school. They worked with their township, the county, the city next door, and they did an infrastructure project and connected their sidewalks and connected into the city sidewalk system that they're adjacent to. He subsequently became the superintendent of the school district. The school district started doing Safe Routes to School at a district approach as soon as we started doing mini grants. They did mini grants for 4 years, which surprised me, but we got good outcome because they knew where to use the infrastructure dollars when it came time to use them. And then we've subsequently given a major grant to that district for all the schools. Harrison is a similar small community. It's further north, tourism focused, with a single grant for 2 elementary schools and 1 junior high school. about $600,000. They put in some sidewalks, some ramps, some pedestrian islands in the trunk line or state highway, and a trail that went from the end of it along a dead-end street through the woods to the junior high school. And then a stub of that went off to the east and tied in some of the other populations to the east. They basically, with a little over $500,000, completely met the needs that still existed in that community for pedestrian access to all of their schools. And they had some partnerships. The local utilities paid for the landscaping and the boulders that you see along the piece of the path there. Fantastically strong collaboration in that community. The Lions Club, law enforcement, school board, city council, city manager, Department of Public Works, City Road Commission, and some other boosters were all there at the ribbon cutting. And I was there, and it was a rainy day, and it's still fantastically strong output. In the city of Detroit, we did quite a number of projects back in 2008, 2009, but the district didn't work with us. And none of those programs really were sustained. About 5 years ago, a utility called us, and they were located between a high school and a transit stop, and they were doing some work with schools. And they asked, what could we do? And I said, nothing with the high school, but if you'd like to work with us, we just got engaged with the district. And then the Metropolitan Planning Organization also participated with some data and particular heat maps to show where the pedestrian accidents were occurring during school times. And we have a really good partnership there. We've committed to 3 phases of grants with them, 10 schools per phase. The first infrastructure project was constructed in 2018. The second one just cleared our engineers a couple weeks ago and will be constructed next year in 2020. And the third one's in the planning process right now. Max was going to talk a little bit more.
In Flint, Michigan, it's another community where we had a district-wide approach. From 2010 to the present, they've done 6 mini grants. They've done 5 major grants that are complete, and then there's 1 that is still pending. Had a really strong local partner with the Crim Fitness Foundation, who was already plugged into the schools through their community and schools approach. In Traverse City, Michigan, that's the cherry capital, we had have another long-standing successful program from 2010 to the present. They've done 5 mini grants, they've done 1 major grant, and then they have another major grant pending for 10 schools that would really connect all the schools in the area. Again, a strong local partner with Norte Youth Cycling. They've done a lot of work to expand the funding for the program, increase advocacy for pedestrian and bike safety all across the city. And as Sarah was mentioning in the beginning, policies are really the key to sustainability and longevity for these programs. Specifically, policies at the school level can really make or break their success. Allowing kids to walk and encouraging them to walk and bike to school. A lot of programs have had success letting the walkers out maybe 2 or 3 minutes ahead of everybody else just to get them out in front of the carpool lines and the bus lines. Again, if you're going to have kids walking to school in the morning, they got to have access to the building, maybe have a healthy snack in the morning. And finally, anytime you have policies that clarify and facilitate volunteers that would be necessary for the program, that's really going to be helpful to the local team. I wanted to say thank you to Michigan Department of Transportation and Federal Highways Administration for their continued support of the Safe Routes to School program in Michigan. And with that, I will turn it back over to Michelle, I believe.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian and Max, for a really great presentation and sharing those wonderful stories with us. We have time for a few questions, and so I'll go ahead. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the question box. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. First question actually is for Brian or Max. Could you tell us about any funding restrictions that come up when using the mini grant program?
Well, we do have a list of eligible activities and non-eligible, but for instance, you can't buy junk food, and we incorporate some judgment, if you will, on what's healthy food and healthy snacks. But we are really trying to let them do whatever they have determined will make their local programming successful. Whether they want to do a bike rodeo, a sustained walk to school day, or walking school bus program. So we originally, our first mini grants were just for students with disabilities. That was the first round. Then we went and tried to be a little bit more, a little less specific than that, but more specific than we are now. And then we said, well, why don't we just open it up? Because the locals should be driving this. They know what they need, and they know what's going to interest their students. So.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's basically what I would say too.
Great. Next question is for Sarah. How did you pick the 4 states that had additional analysis? And second part, was the focus on cities, large cities in those states, or did you do statewide analysis in those states?
Good question. The 4 states were chosen through our partnership with YUSA. They are working with a bunch of their statewide to support physical activity and policy change in a variety of different states. And those 4 states, the statewide were focused on safe routes to school. So they were sort of particularly good places for us to dig in more deeply. As far as focusing on large cities versus statewide, we looked statewide. So we did certainly look at the larger cities. There are definitely places that are likely to have safe routes to school programs. We reached out to folks that we knew in them if we hadn't gotten responses already. But we were also looking statewide and sending out information and surveying people statewide.
Great. Thank you. Another question for Brian or Max. You mentioned the PED collision maps and looking at collision data. Were you seeing any common causes or factors to collisions and any commonly used countermeasures in those communities?
I'm not sure what the causes of those accidents were. Where this was happening is in the city of Detroit, actually, and it's one of the most dangerous cities in the country for pedestrians. We made a wonderful ranked list for that through the Federal Highway Administration. But one of the common treatments down there is to actually have adults out there, whether they're walking school bus leaders or something called block captains. And then, although we can't pay for them, crossing guards are nice, but we've had a couple different variants on how to have adult people on the street so that there's actually oversight. And it's not just crossing guards, but although the crashes are specific and immediate need and they are driving the planning process, it's actually some of the urban dangers that are generally deemed the highest needs or areas of concern in some of those schools. And so it's generally adults being present with authority, and we've paid for radios that they work with community policing activity so that they can actually get the police there in a hurry. In addition, the city of Detroit, the public school district in Detroit has its own police force. And so, as Max mentioned, the lead officer there, she's been strongly involved in the plans and the execution down there in Detroit. So,
and we're also changing the built environment. As Brian mentioned, they have major grant for infrastructure changes. One has already been awarded and completed. The other one, the second phase, is about it's done. Its design is done, but it will be implemented when the funding's available, and then the third phase will come after that. So in some respects, it's the built environment, and that needs to change.
And in the built environment, there's a lot of vacant buildings, and the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, using federal funds, has worked with us since 2008 and targeted initially for 2 years vacant buildings within 400 yards of schools or routes that those schools picked for emphasis that were participating in the Safe Routes to School plan. So there has been a lot of blight elimination and community cleanup days. And I'll give our folks here at the MFF a lot of credit. some of these grant coordinators have gone down there and spent Saturdays helping to pick up litter and beautify the neighborhoods. So the physical environment has been a major focus, although we have not paid for blight elimination.
Thank you. It looks like we have just 1 minute left, and I don't want to keep anybody over the hour. So we had a lot of great questions come in. If you have questions specifically about Michigan's programs, please feel free to reach out to Brian or Max. We'll include contact information in our post webinar email. If you have questions about the Safe Routes to School Census, please reach out to either Sarah or myself, and we'd be happy to chat with you and provide more information. Thank you again to all of our speakers today for joining us, and thank you all for joining us and watching this webinar. Really quickly, before you leave today, I want to let you know that the Safe Routes Partnership offers consulting services. So if you're looking for customized trainings or workshops or assistance with planning or program development, please feel free to visit our website or email me at michelle@saferoutespartnership.org. And finally, we are going to be sending out a post-webinar email with a quick survey to follow up on the webinar. And we'd love to hear your feedback. And thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.